I just suddenly thought of I think it's from that 2010 paper as well, to be honest, but the idea of compassion is not boundless, that we have these various appraisals that we might make of the sufferer and does that come into your Science of Happiness or Pathway to Happiness sort of coursework, if you like, the sort of exploring one's own appraisals?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think we call them mental habits just
Hmm.
because people who aren't, trained in psychology, appraisal is not like people think of like the value of your house if you say appraisal in
Okay.
the in the
Yes.
United States. So
Right.
sure, yeah, when people have a really pessimistic approach to understanding the world around them, they're likely to sort of take a different path than compassion because they're just going to think about the unlikelihood of any impact of their engagement in the situation. Um, so what I think you're asking about though is either something called compassion collapse or something called compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue, I don't think is a real thing.
Mm.
Compassion collapse is something that I've tried to describe in our conversation, but I'll point to the point at which it happens again. So, compassion fatigue is the idea that like you only have so much energy to feel compassion. Um, I actually think that true compassion is not depleting. It's not something that requires extending of resources. And I say that with two important points of clarification. One is compassion isn't limited to things outside of yourself. I can't think of, if I'm going to be a compassionate person, then I need to spend every waking moment and every drop of my energy helping other people, other people, other people. No, pain and suffering is all of us. And I, as a human, experience pain and suffering. And when I am experiencing pain and suffering, that compassion has to work in that direction also. I'm
Mm.
sure you're familiar with Kristen Neff and the whole science of self-compassion, but the I like to just argue that compassion is like it's omnidirectional. It's 360 degrees. And to the extent that you are applying a nurturing and caring stance to pain and suffering in a way that is supportive, that's not costly, right? It's regenerative. And so I don't really buy the story of compassion fatigue. What I think is the mistake that gets made is calling compassion fatigue what is really empathic distress fatigue. So
Yes.
empathic distress fatigue is if I see you really upset and I start to mirror that feeling because I'm an empathic person, and then I start to think about that feeling that I'm having as a threat, a worry, something costly, something potentially harmful, something upsetting, like that kind of ruminative, self-focused appraisal is costly. Right now, I'm feeling bad, right? And so that bad feeling over and over again, if you do encounter pain and suffering outside of yourself and you don't notice or attend to the pain and suffering within your own self, yeah, that's something that becomes overwhelming. But
Mm.
that is in many ways an indication of not having actually ever felt compassion, right? You
Mm.
just never actually felt it. You were stuck at that point of empathic distress. Now,
Mm.
compassion collapse is a little different, and it's when people sort of decide that there's nothing they can do. The classic study that outlined compassion collapse, and this is by my friend and colleague Daryl Cameron, was to ask people how empathic they felt towards an individual who was clearly suffering, and also ask how willing they were to offer support, to nurture that person. And most people are actually pretty willing. They see this person, they feel like, oh, yeah, I really want to help. And then the next condition is five people. The next condition is 25 people and then 100 people. And if you're thinking linearly, you might go, oh gosh, the more people there are, the more motivated you might feel to approach and do something and lend your hand in any way that you can. And actually, no, what people do when they feel like they don't have any path to helpfulness is suppress the feeling and think it's not something I have any power to help with. And so I'd rather not see it at all than acknowledge my own inadequacy in this situation.
Mm.
Also, very reasonable coping strategy.
Hmm.
But, in an ideal society or community, it's not all up to one person. There should never be one person who is the purveyor of compassion for everyone. That's not going to work out. That's not going to help the collective, right? Compassion in many ways is evolved for the sake of supporting collectives and individuals in collectives. If we didn't have collectives, if it was just you by yourself, you wouldn't need compassion, right? You would need some kind of self-care thing, but you wouldn't need compassion, right? You wouldn't need that orientation. So there is this kind of like situational optimal condition for compassion, which is that there's a willingness that it's shared and expressed in a shared way. It's not
Mm.
up to the solitary individual. Because when a person feels like it's all on me, I'm the only one here who is being compassionate, then you're likely to end up at compassion collapse.
Collapse. Yes, I'm so glad you went to compassion fatigue and compassion collapse, because that was definitely my next kind of question too. Is because you came to Brisbane and presented at the UQ Compassion Symposium, and you sort of presented, compassion fatigue, no such thing. And I have a slide on some of my workshops where with the photo of you and me, and then this kind of news flash sort of thing that sort of makes the point about well, that you really just beautifully summed up around compassion fatigue's not quite right. It's often maybe just fatigue and burnout. And the problem sometimes with the word compassion fatigue is it puts the onus on the helper, that they're fatigued and they need to do something about their own fatigue. And it forgets the whole system around that, which can be a part of what might lead to burnout.